And before I announce our visitor, I'd like to tell you about two lectures that I encourage you to attend. There's a Wednesday workshop this week on archiving and inventorying your work. Frances Thorpe, the director of the library, and I will be addressing that subject. Even if you've got the most wonderful documentation, digital images of your work, if you can't find them, they're useless. So this really covers all of that. And if you start now, you'll be doing yourself a great favor. Next Monday, Leslie Smith, what year? Maybe 2007, 3 or 4 years ago, graduated from the painting department at MICA, went to Yale, and has been out for a couple of years. He's coming back to do some crits with my core group, but at noon, he's going to give a lecture on his work and applying to his experience about applying to graduate school. That will be in the seminar space, 209 in the studio center. And as always, that's a bring your own chair event. Our speaker today, Kristen Hileman, is no stranger to MICA, even though she's only been in Baltimore for a year. A year ago, she came to the Baltimore Museum of Art as the curator for contemporary art. And she's been on campus several times to give crits and also to talk to George's class. Is that right? Well, crits, okay. Do you know George well? Yes, okay. Kristen came here from the Hirshhorn, where she was an associate curator. She's going to talk today a bit about her developing career as a curator. So I'll just fill in a few details of her early life. She grew up in Chicago, took classes as in high school at the Art Institute of Chicago. Very interesting, decided to go to American University to study international relations, but post-college really wanted to continue her interest in the arts and eventually went to the University of Maryland, where she has a degree in art history. While she was there, she had an internship at the Hirshhorn, and that was her the door that opened up her ability to be able to work there. So, Kristen, we're very glad that you're here with us, and come on up.
Hi, everybody. Christine sort of suggested that I give you some biographical information, and that really made me think that I'd like to keep this very casual. And I'm hoping to allow some time for you to ask questions. But what I'll do is give you fill you in a little bit more about my professional background. And then, as time permits, I'd like to sort of give you an overview of some of the projects I'm working on now as kind of, just an introduction to some of the themes and concerns in contemporary art that really interest me. So as Christine said, I grew up outside of Chicago and attended classes at the Art Institute in their early college program. But I did make a decision with the very strong help of my parents not to get an art degree, but rather to come to Washington and get just a BA in international relations. While I was in school, I did things like studied abroad in Rome and spent a lot of time focusing really focusing on taking art history classes wherever I could. And then I actually signed up for an arts administration program. And you know, that was very transformative for me. When I entered American, I had pretty much figured that I'd left, that I'd left the arts behind in terms of my professional career. But being able to spend a semester meeting people who worked in the museum field and actually learning, not just the museum field, but also the commercial gallery field. We met with arts journalists. It was just an opportunity to kind of learn what a full range of career possibilities there are out there. I mean, I don't think I went into college even understanding really what a curator was and that I might want to be one. And another nice thing about that semester was that it had a practical component. So I did an internship at a regional art center named the Arlington Art Center, just outside of Washington, across the Potomac. And it was very fortuitous in that I arrived as an intern just as a new executive director arrived. The executive director's background was really in performing arts, and so because I had practical experience in the arts, really at that point more in terms of, aspiring to be a visual artist, that internship ended up turning into a job when I graduated. So I can't tell you enough the value of getting out there, and if not doing internships for college credit, then volunteering in the kinds of organizations that you think you might want to have a professional relationship with in terms of working there, because it just, I don't know, it just really allows you to see firsthand whether or not this is the place you want to be, and to build practical skills that really make you employable. So at the Art Center, I was doing everything from installing the artwork, choosing the artwork, working with jurors, outside jurors, writing press releases, writing grants. And any one of those sort of things that I was doing in this very small organization, in a way, could have transformed into a career path that could have gone into public relations or grant writing. But really what appealed to me most was working with artists. And I think it was there at the Art Center that I understood that rather than engaging with the arts in any sort of historical way, going back to those art history classes I fit in during my undergraduate degree, I really wanted to be part of the process of putting exhibitions together. So after being there 4 years, I decided to go back and get an art history degree. And I did that at the University of Maryland, College Park, which allowed me to continue working at the Art Center for a year. And I went in, I was accepted into the PhD program, but I went in really thinking that that academia wasn't going to be for me, and that I would be happy with a master's degree, and in the end, I was right. I knew myself that well enough, but I'm still happy to have, again, had that broader opportunity before me of potentially moving forward in academia if that's what I had chosen to do. And then again, as Christine said, I ended up taking an internship. It was actually a fellowship during my last semester at University of Maryland at the Hirshhorn Museum. I arrived at a really interesting time. The museum was one of the organizers of the Robert Gober exhibition at the Venice Biennale. And so I was helping both Olga Vizo, who's now the director of the Walker Art Museum, but at that time was an associate curator at the Hirshhorn. I was helping her from the curatorial side prepare for that exhibition, and I was also working with the director of public affairs in terms of promoting the show. And it was an important foot in the door because as I graduated, it turned out that the museum had a vacancy in the public affairs office. And so that actually was my first position, full-time position in the museum as a public affairs assistant. And I kind of bided my time, was there for 2 years when an assistant curator position opened up, and was able to get that job really because the people at the institution knew me and they knew about my passion for contemporary art. And by that time I had acquired a lot of knowledge about how the institution worked. I knew about the collection, I knew about their upcoming exhibition program. So it was, it was easy for them to make the decision to have me step into that role. And from there, I moved up to associate curator. I was at the museum, Hirshhorn Museum, for a total of 8 years. And I worked on all sorts of great projects. I love the museum a lot. But I then decided that, again, I wanted to expand my horizons and work in a different kind of museum. The Hirshhorn is a very special kind of museum because it's a federal museum. It's part of the Smithsonian Institution. And it's really rather unique in terms of not having all of its funding sort of handed to it each year, but having a more stable funding source, and also being a museum that exists in a city but really programs for a tourist audience. And what I wanted to do was to be in a museum that, you know, had to be more responsive to the community it was located in, that thought of itself more in connection to a city and a region, and to try and figure out what it would mean to work with contemporary artists in that context, and see how contemporary art has a role in Baltimore. And that's one of the reasons I'm very interested in following what's going on here at the Institute and what you all are doing, because really, you know, it comes down to what artists are making now. That's what the contemporary is all about for me, more so than a historical period. So I'd like to see the arts at the museum and the arts in Baltimore in general as kind of a totality that's living and changing and dynamic. Now, when I got to Baltimore, one of the things that was already on the agenda was a late Warhol exhibition. And I've left a slide on the screen in the hopes that subliminally it's working its way into your psyches and that you'll come see the show, which is up through January 9th. I should also say next Saturday, this coming Saturday, October 30th, we're having a late night party, which is an opportunity to see the show at a discounted ticket price. It's very interesting. One of the things that a curator does in a museum situation is engage with the collection. Now at the Hirshhorn, I was working with 12,000 objects that all fell into the modern and contemporary range or period. And at the BMA, it's a little bit different scenario. I'm working with a much smaller concentration of modern and contemporary objects, but within a bigger overall collection. So there are 90,000 objects in the BMA's collection. And what happens is that as a curator, you really have to come to terms with, or you work with what the past has built up. So what the previous curators in your position have decided are important acquisitions for the museum, and also what an area's collectors have decided are important acquisitions, have brought into their personal collections, and then decided to give to the museum as a, you know, as really their legacy. And the BMA has an outstanding collection of late Warhol paintings. There was a decision made in the late 80s and the early 90s to really take advantage of the offer of the Warhol estate. Warhol died in 1987, and his estate then, a few years later, made institutions kind of a deal that they could buy the artworks that were still left, or some of the artworks that were still left in the estate at below market value. So it would end up being a partial gift and a partial purchase to institutions. And so a decision was made on the part of the BMA to take advantage of this and to really build a great strength in Warhol by focusing on his late career. In a sense, those works were not as expensive as, say, a 1962 piece, so one could acquire more of them. And I think that the current exhibition, which is really an effort to understand Warhol's late career in a way that hasn't been done before, bears out the importance of that decision to mark the BMA's contemporary collection as one that has Warhol holdings in depth. In fact, we have more late Warhol paintings than any other institution outside of the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. And, you know, the reason I would suggest that you all come down and see the show is that it's an exhibition about painting, with the person at the core of the exhibition being someone who really destabilized painting. So in 1962, Warhol was kind of on the forefront, or one of the most influential pop artist bringing in photography to his medium, and saying that, you know, painting is something that one can produce in a way that's mediated by machine or mechanical elements, whether they be the sort of silk screening process or that initial choice to photograph something and then turn it into a silk screen. He only made his early pop works for a very short amount of time. He stopped in 1965, or he claimed to stop in 1965. What really happened is that he continued painting, but he put an emphasis on making films and doing things like starting Interview magazine and really building up a diversified practice as an artist and a diversified practice as a business person. In the mid-1970s, he re-engaged with painting. And if you come to the show, you'll see that he pushed into abstraction, which was something that he hadn't done in his earlier career. He collaborated with younger artists, namely Jean-Michel Basquiat and Francesco Clemente, and just began to really build up more complicated compositions in terms of their painterliness, and also in some ways in terms of their iconography. And just to address the image on the screen, this is a self-portrait, obviously, from 1986, so the year before Warhol died. He was born in 1928, so he's heading towards 60 at this moment. And by 1986, he was certainly the celebrity artist that he had always set out to be. One of Warhol's great, or his classic quotes came in 1966 when he answered an interviewer who was trying to get at the deeper meaning behind Warhol's work, that if you want to know all about me, Warhol, just look at the surface of me, my paintings, and my film. That's all there is. Now, what's curious is in 1986, he did a series of self-portraits where he's wearing this very iconic fright wig. But in several of them, he's layered his portrait over camouflage. And, you know, it's almost as if he's illustrating that quote, that famous quote, and illustrating how, you know, how disingenuous or perhaps how Sphinx-like the quote is, because camouflage, of course, is all about the surface, it's true, but it also signifies that there's something deeper that lies behind it. And I think that can extend out as a metaphor for Warhol himself, that while he was very much dealing with the surface of issues in American culture, those images of our products and our personalities can be read in deeper ways. So I do encourage you to come to the exhibition. Now let's move forward. On view at the same time, and now we're getting really into the heart of what I wanted to share with you today, is a collaboration, a project by two artists, Wade Guyton and Guyton Walker, who have individual practices. One shows with Matthew Marks, the other shows with Paula Cooper, but they also collapse their identities into a collaboration, a true collaborative called Guyton Walker. And I felt that it was interesting and important if we were going to do a Warhol show that celebrated the decision in the early 1990s to really concentrate on Warhol as an influential artist, to show how that influence continues through to today. And Kelly and Wade seemed like a great choice of dynamic young artists to do this. So, you know, as I mentioned, the exhibition deals with Warhol's collaborations with Basquiat and Clemente. So there was a natural sort of affinity there that Guyton Walker work as a collaborative. But it's interesting how they update the idea of being a collaborative. Let me show you another image. In that they don't say, if you look at a painting by Warhol and Basquiat, you can very much pick out which are the Warhol contributions and which are the Basquiat contributions. Here, Wade and Kelly truly merge to be one creative entity. So, you know, there might be one might make a contribution in one area and the other in another, but they don't really reveal that information. It's almost as if this idea of authorship, you know, of identifying your work, which began actually, I mean, it began before, but we could say that Warhol was one of the instigators of challenging that notion, because he began to borrow other people's images as the content of his art really comes, sort of takes several steps forward in an example of work like this, where the artists don't separate themselves out as sort of heroic creators, like you might imagine a Picasso or a Matisse. They are content in working, in truly working together. And I do see that as a trend, an important trend that will continue in the art world of today. What's also interesting in these works, is that just as Warhol used screen printing, so do Wade and Kelly. They're, however, using digital screen printing, and their source images aren't mediated through a camera, but rather through a computer scanner. So whether it be finding interesting, advertising images that already exist, or actually scanning in images of fruit, or scanning in fruit itself into a scanner, that's where the image is being generated, and that's also one of the main areas where the collaboration is happening. They use Photoshop to tweak the images, and can both do that as a team. So I think that's quite interesting. The other curious thing is that just as Warhol's images, if you think of them, often have like streaks or blemishes or blips where the silk screen process is kind of revealing itself and its imperfections, Wade and Kelly have chosen to allow the checkerboard pattern, that's kind of that initial layer of Photoshop, to come to the surface as one of the decorative or aesthetic elements of their artwork. And indeed, sort of the fine art and the idea of decoration or commercial design are all merging here. Just as you see, there's a table in the background, and tables are an important component of this work. Paint cans, if we go back, these stacks in the back of the image are actually screen printed slabs of drywall. So they come to the installations with multiple sheets of drywall and can reconfigure those slabs in different, or stacks in different ways, using kind of a Home Depot material, but referencing not just Warhol, but say people like Richard Serra, who in their sculptures were interested in sort of how gravity acts as a component for determining the shape of the structure. The sort of big, chunky, melting thing that you see on the platform is literally a candle. It's 1,600 pounds. We were told it was only 800 pounds, and then it arrived, and we had to move 1,600 pounds of solid wax rather than 800, which makes a big difference. The artist melted some of this on site, but it had also been previously melted. There are wicks at the very top of it. And again, kind of looking at something that references a functional form and bringing it into an art context. And again, this is the legacy of Warhol, really combining the high and the low in culture to kind of make an art, a total artwork, where it's, there are glimpses of our everyday world coming into the museum space, into the gallery space. And again, I think that's a trend. It goes back to Duchamp, but it's a 20th century trend that's really influencing 21st century artists. And if you're interested in learning more about Wade and Kelly's process, they are coming to speak on November 13th. It's a Saturday at 2 o'clock. Now, another thing that I'm working on right now is a final project at the Hirshhorn Museum, which opens on November 10th. And it's a two-person exhibition, although these artists do not work as collaborators. In this instance, it's me as a curator that is really bringing two people from very different parts of the world and different processes together because of common content in their work. The artists are really quite young, particularly in this case. Cyprien Gaillard was born in 1980. He's a French artist who's based in Berlin. And on view by Cyprien will be a film, and I'm here showing you sort of stills from various parts of the film. So let me show you the last still, and then I'm going to go back and explain what you're seeing. So Cyprien is interested in the failure of the modernist enterprise in architecture. And to kind of try and talk about that in a very brief and succinct way is difficult, but what I can say here is that from Cyprien's point of view and from many people's point of view, in the architectural efforts of the early to mid 20th century of kind of shaping our social environment by very rational structures in an attempt to bring in a more harmonious sort of social balance, extending all the way to safer living environments and more efficient ways of moving through a city. In Cyprien's point of view, it's been a bit of a failure, and something that thinkers, artists, architects today have to come to terms with. And so Cyprien is based in Europe, as I said, and he's very interested in collecting imagery, if not from firsthand, from other sources that show these failures happening. So he made a 30-minute film called Doznański Rayon, which essentially unfolds almost like an opera, because there's a very compelling soundtrack, a musical soundtrack by an artist named Kudlam that plays alongside these images. The first sequence is footage that someone else shot of two street gangs fighting. It's a very bloody and massive battle in the context of a modernist building outside of St. Petersburg. The footage then goes on to a suburb of Paris, where you get this kind of high-rise modernist building, and this segment goes on maybe for about 10 minutes, and there's a very playful sound and light show that is, playing itself out on top of the building with flowers, and the music at that point in the piece is rather lighthearted and lively. And then all of a sudden, someone triggers a detonator and the entire building collapses. It's being blown up to demolish it. And you really get sort of pushed and pulled two different ways in the footage. And then finally, this is footage that Cyprien himself shot. He made an illegal helicopter flight, sort of a small helicopter very low in the airspace around this block of really formidable and kind of unforgiving modernist buildings in the Ukraine outside of Kiev, and just sort of ends the film in a very bleak environment that is full of buildings and no people. So it's kind of a fascinating process, because he is an artist who's really engaging with architecture. So there's a breaking of boundaries of disciplines, and this, I would say, is another trend that I think is quite important for artists working today, that whether it be something so simple as an artist working primarily as a filmmaker, producing video, or more complex, collaborating with someone who brings a musical component, a very thoughtful musical component to the work, or an artist that's looking at a different discipline to offer a critique. That those strict categories that once divided the arts are all but gone, and young artists are disregarding them. This is the second component that Cyprien will be contributing to the exhibition. He has gone all the way around the world, from places like Angkor Wat to Chernobyl, where there was that horrible nuclear disaster many years ago, to Detroit and other sort of dying industrial cities in the United States, and shot Polaroid photography of those artworks, and then juxtaposed them in these sort of specimen cases. Now, what's interesting here is that Cyprien acknowledges that his Polaroids are going to fade. They're going to become as obsolete and ultimately as unusable as the buildings themselves. So again, something that's really kind of another attribute of younger practice that really is turning many things on its head that have been assumed in the past, that an artist actually could produce something that won't exist, and then perhaps is not as commodifiable as objects produced by older generations. And so speaking of one generation of artists looking to another, the second artist in the project that will be on view at the Hirshhorn is a Mexican artist named Garcia Torres. And Mario, I'd say as much as working as a traditional fine artist is really sort of the archaeologist of the art world. He's gone throughout, again, traveled throughout the world, looking at artist projects. So he looked at a Martin Kippenberger project in Greece. He's done a project that engaged with Alighiero Eboetti's work in Afghanistan. And for this particular piece, which takes the format of a slideshow, so just like Cyprien making the decision to use Polaroids, a kind of obsolete medium, Mario is also working in a way that's kind of old-fashioned and increasingly obsolete. It's not so easy to get slide projectors anymore. But Mario has put together a slideshow of his travels to a Caribbean, or the ruins of a former Caribbean resort called the Grape Bay in St. Croix. And you see kind of the long shot there. What's interesting about this particular resort, and what Mario found out through his research, and again, you know, as we're talking about paradigm shifts, artists really being strongly engaged in research, times with time in archives and libraries and online, and going firsthand to discover places or uncover facts about places is very different than traditional studio practice. So what Mario found out about this place is that the French artist Daniel Buron, and I have an image of his work coming up, but to give you a sense, he's the conceptual French artist who is so well known for his very severe striped paintings and striped installations. Well, Buron early in the 1960s accepted a commission for this pleasure resort that was a mosaic mural commission. You can kind of see a little bit of the murals if you look in the color photograph on the back. There's a little like bathhouse there, and there's some colorful tile work. So Buron accepted a commission to produce mosaics at this location that were very organic, very decorative, really quite playful, and he later came to disavow their existence and sort of reject the work that he had previously done at this commission. So Mario got kind of interested in what sort of the artist's work looked like, or what Buron's work looked like before Buron was really Buron. And he went and found archival materials such as this black and white postcard, and then went back and shot firsthand images of how the resort looks now. Now, I'm not going to play this whole musical component for you, but I want to give you a little bit of a flavor of it, because just like Cyprien, Mario has a soundtrack that accompanies his piece. So there would be a slideshow playing in the gallery, and this kind of, it's almost like a French torch song that starts out with a spoken word component.
On the southeastern coast of St. Croix is what once was called the Grape Bay Hotel. Its remains have decayed over the years, the decades. As a consequence, or with the excuse of the submarine warfare, the Virgin Islands were bought by the United States, long before the establishment of the hotel. Under the new political climate, by mid-century, the economy of the island had reshaped. Sugar plantation and rum production had been replaced by tourism. The Grape Bay was part of the new continental enthusiasm. One could say that the story of the hotel is surrounded by deceptions and disappointments. Even before it opened its doors in the early 60s, the enterprise was already the motive of legal and economic disputes.
So like I said, I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's about I think it's about a 10-minute sort of interlude where there's spoken word followed by sort of the tempo picking up, and then a female voice coming in and actually singing the text of a letter that Buron wrote about his frustrations over the commission. But I think even with that little snippet, you can get a sense that in addition to commenting on Buron's work and his development as an artist, Mario has used this particular example as a way of looking at broader sort of cultural and political issues around this particular geographic location. So it's very fascinating to see how, artists are really, in some ways, engaging with social issues in a very overt manner in their works. And here you get a sense of, again, that swimming pool area, and then Buron's later work. And I like this juxtaposition because, again, we're sort of talking about the same period that Cyprien is looking at, how you have modernist architecture sort of meant to create this ideal, hotel or idyllic setting, and then Buron coming in and actually decorating it in biomorphic shapes. Then Buron disavowing the biomorphism in his earlier work and producing stripes that actually reflect that kind of modernist sensibility. So there's in a way, there's a lot of levels of critique in Mario's work, including, I think latent in there is a criticism of kind of the totalitarianism of Buron's later project. And that, from today's point of view, it might be interesting to see more diversity in an artist's work. We get more curious about what Buron did before the stripes than we are about the stripes that are so much a signifier of his work. And again, more ruin. All right, so very quickly, another project that's coming up is a photography exhibition that I'm doing at the BMA in February. It opens February 19th. And one of the things that was really surprising to me about the BMA's collection is that it has amazing photography holdings. So we can be looking at young artists like Micheline Thomas today, who is revisiting in this composition actually a painting by Edouard Manet, Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, and changing the gender and sort of setting of that famous painting, and see how her work has roots in, say, someone like Cindy Sherman's work. We can do the same thing looking at Reneke Dijkstra, another contemporary photographer, and seeing, how Dijkstra's interest in childhood is mirrored in, I think that's the right word, mirrored in someone like Mary Ellen Mark's photojournalistic photography of years past. This is something I really urge you to come and see firsthand. The museum owns Larry Clark's Tulsa series, which was a very sort of mind-shaking look at amphetamine users in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the artist grew up. I'm happy to say that, I'm happy. I can tell you that Larry Clark is currently having an exhibition in Paris, and it's generating a lot of thought and reaction, because these pictures are very challenging, and you won't get to see the full suite of Tulsa photographs in Paris, but you will in Baltimore. So we're a little bit more cosmopolitan than them, I guess. We also have Burtynsky, and sort of Burtynsky's play of capturing the landscape, but doing it in a way that has formal or abstract qualities, and also makes sort of a comment on the world around us and sort of how the industrial landscape has been growing. You can see that mirrored in the Becher's work, and even someone like William Eggleston, who made very moving and sociological pictures of the South. Again, I'm moving quickly, but I just want to share so much with you. Another thing that I do as a curator is I make acquisitions for the museum, and recently we just acquired a video piece by Jennifer Alora and Guillermo Casadilla, who are the artists who have just been announced to be the U.S. representatives at the next Venice Biennale. Again, it's an example of artists engaging with social issues. In the work that we acquired for the BMA, the artist went to New Orleans not that long after Hurricane Katrina, and they made a film that sort of juxtaposes the images of the lower Mississippi River Delta with a home that had been destroyed by the hurricane. And the home is animated or activated by a person who actually lives in the lower Ninth Ward, one of the areas that was hardest hit by the hurricane, playing out a musical composition on the blinds. So in this essence, kind of producing something creative, producing music or sound out of the wreckage of a terrible catastrophe. And, you know, Alora and Calzadilla are really artists that I think are important to be following right now in the ways that they're bringing sort of social commentary and sound into contemporary art. And some of you may know this great piece that they produced a few years ago, in which they cut out the center of a grand piano and then had musicians actually play Beethoven's Ode to Joy by standing in the middle of the whole and essentially having to play the composition in reverse, because their whole perspective of how you would approach the piano keyboard was turned upside down. And of course, that hole in the middle of the piano changed the structure of the instrument, so there would be certain moments when a key would be touched and you'd hear a thud rather than a note, because the corresponding chords were missing. So in a way, you can see even in this piece that what the artists are looking at is sort of producing a sound or producing music in the face of adversity. And it's very exciting how they're bringing performers into the equation. Another sound piece, I'm not going to actually play it for you because it will take a long time, but another piece that we just acquired is a work by Susan Phillips, another artist to watch. Phillips is one of the nominees for the Turner Prize, which will be announced in December, and her works are entirely sound-based. So it's sound pushing you to look at an environment rather than sound presented in conjunction with visual images. What you're seeing on your left, so up here, is the Guggenheim Rotunda, which is the venue that first exhibited the piece that we have now acquired. And the piece really is a song. Actually, I should go ahead and play it for you because it's too hard to explain. So this is the piece installed at the Guggenheim, and the piece is truly the sound. It's, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. What interests me about that piece is the way that it brings narrative and emotion. How it brings narrative and emotion into a contemporary art space that often, is often associated with just, let's say, for instance, minimalist form, which is very intellectual. It's very wonderful and profound work, but sometimes strips out feeling, or sort of that kind of visceral response that we have to things like music. So I imagine, installing this piece either in the West Wing in the contemporary gallery space near the windows, so that people can look out and kind of get a sense of landscape, which is addressed in the film, in the song, or even in the sculpture garden, where the sound actually becomes a very unorthodox sculpture in itself. It's really a soundscape. Now, the final work I wanted to share with you this afternoon is that of Sarah Oppenheimer. And I'm very excited about this prospect. We're going to be closing the contemporary wing actually in January for a year's time, during which the wing will be renovated and we'll do a full reinstallation of the collection, hopefully putting out some pieces that maybe you haven't been seen for a while and some new acquisitions that have never been seen. But we've also invited Sarah Oppenheimer, who I believe taught at MICA a few years ago, to do an intervention in the space. And Sarah's work, again, is a hybrid. It's kind of it's sculpture and it's architectural. It's really an architectural intervention. These images are a little bit difficult to understand, but what she's doing is sort of creating different sort of windows and walls and ceilings in spaces to change our perspective of the space, to sort of bring the outside inside in some cases, as with the mattress factory, or to kind of create these dramatic bridges across different kinds of building materials. So you have her dealing with brick or creating a bridge between brick and glass. In this latest piece that she executed at Rice University. So if you are familiar with the contemporary wing at the museum, the West Wing, you'll know that there's sort of a big concrete kind of atrium space that you walk into before you get into the exhibition galleries proper. And I feel in some ways, well, that space probably was quite appropriate to the art world of the early 90s when the wing was open, but there's really a different sensibility in the world right now that isn't so much about creating, let's say, a very formal or formidable or in some ways distancing connection to viewers, but the sensibility that's out there now is a little bit more tactile, sensuous, and giving people something that's really inviting or engaging. So Sarah is going to be trying to make that happen in some ways, to work with what I think is very challenging space and literally build to change viewers' perspective of what that space can be.